Have you ever seen someone stand up when everyone else stayed silent? I was there when it happened. When a skinny, poor kid with nothing to lose faced down the school's biggest bullies to defend someone who couldn't defend himself. What happened next silenced an entire school and changed the rules forever. But nobody realized that moment was just the beginning of something much bigger. Let me take you back to Westridge High School, a place where social hierarchies were as rigid as they come. I was a teacher there, watching from the sidelines as the drama of teenage life played out every day. The hallways were filled with the usual suspects, the athletes who ruled the social ladder, the academic achievers, and those who blended into the background, hoping to make it through another day unnoticed. Among those trying to stay invisible was Ethan Carter, a 15-year-old sophomore with worn-out clothes and a quiet demeanor that spoke volumes about his life outside school walls. His faded jeans had been patched multiple times and his sneakers were holding on by a thread. The other kids knew he lived in the run-down apartment complex on the edge of town, the one that most parents warned their children to avoid. Ethan wasn't just poor. He was the kind of poor that made other kids uncomfortable, the kind that reminded them of how fortunate they were. While everyone was flashing their new phones and discussing weekend plans at the mall, Ethan was silently completing his assignments, occasionally glancing at the clock as if counting the minutes until he could escape. I later learned he worked evenings at the local gas station, trying to help his single mother make ends meet after his father had abandoned them years earlier. But there was also Michael Winters, another sophomore who seemed even more isolated than Ethan. Michael had cerebral palsy that affected his right side, giving him a distinctive limp and slightly slurred speech. The school district had fought against providing proper accommodations until his parents threatened legal action. Even then, the ramps were steep, and the elevator frequently broke down, forcing Michael to navigate the stairs with painful slowness while other students pushed past him, annoyed at the delay. The social environment at Westridge mirrored countless schools across America, a place where difference was rarely celebrated and vulnerability was exploited. The school administration talked about inclusivity in assemblies, but turned a blind eye to the everyday cruelty that happened between classes or during lunch periods. It was easier to pretend everything was fine than to address the uncomfortable reality. The bullying started small, as it often does. Snickers when Michael spoke in class, imitations of his walk in the hallways, books accidentally knocked from his hands, whispers that weren't really whispers at all. The ringleader was Blake Thompson, the star quarterback whose father sat on the school board and made generous donations to the athletics department. Blake stood at 6 feet 2 inches with the confidence of someone who had never faced a consequence he couldn't charm or buy his way out of. I had reported Blake's behavior several times, but the response was always the same. Boys will be boys, or we need more evidence, or my personal favorite, Michael needs to learn to stand up for himself. As if his physical disability was somehow matched by a deficiency in character. The injustice made my blood boil, but as a relatively new teacher, my influence was limited. The tension was building. Michael retreated further into himself with each passing day. He started missing classes. His grades dropped. His parents called meetings that resulted in vague promises and no action. The system was failing him, and everyone knew it, but no one seemed willing or able to change it. But then came that Tuesday in October. The cafeteria was buzzing with the normal lunchtime energy. The smell of questionable pizza and floor cleaner hung in the air, mixing with the sounds of hundreds of conversations. I was on lunch duty, standing near the wall, watching the social ecosystem in action. Michael was sitting alone as usual at the end of a table, carefully cutting his food into manageable pieces. Blake and his friends entered, scanning the room like predators. When they spotted Michael, something in Blake's expression changed. Later, I would learn he'd had a fight with his girlfriend that morning and had failed a test he hadn't studied for. Michael was about to become the outlet for all that frustration. They approached Michael's table, surrounding it. Blake reached over and grabbed Michael's chocolate milk. "Hey, Spaz, I'm thirsty. You don't mind sharing, right?" The cafeteria started to quiet, that instinctive hush that falls when everyone senses something bad is about to happen. Michael stared at his tray. I paid for that," he managed to say. Blake's laugh was cold. "Oh, it can talk. What else can you do, freak? Can you catch?" He dangled the milk carton over Michael's head, threatening to drop it. The tension grew. I started moving toward them, but I was on the other side of the cafeteria, Other teachers seemed frozen, unsure how to intervene without escalating the situation. But then, something unexpected happened. From 2 tables over, Ethan Carter stood up. The skinny boy who never drew attention to himself was suddenly walking toward Blake Thompson, the untouchable king of Westridge High. "Leave him alone," Ethan said, his voice surprisingly steady for someone confronting a boy who outweighed him by at least 50 pounds. Blake turned, momentarily confused by this interruption to his performance. "What did you say to me? Trailer trash." The cafeteria fell completely silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped to watch. Every student knew Blake's reputation, his hair-triggered temper, and the protection his family name afforded him. "I said leave him alone," Ethan repeated, louder this time. "He didn't do anything to you." Blake's face darkened. "Mind your own business before you get hurt." "This is my business," Ethan replied. "We all have to eat here. We all have to go to school here. And we're all watching you act like a jerk because it makes you feel big to pick on someone who can't fight back." The words hung in the air. Blake looked around, suddenly aware of the audience, of the hundreds of eyes watching to see what he would do next. His friends shifted uncomfortably. "You think anyone cares what you have to say?" Blake finally responded, but there was a hint of uncertainty in his voice now. "You're nobody. Your mom cleans houses for my neighbors." I was close enough now to see Ethan's face flush with embarrassment, but he didn't back down. "Yeah, she does. She works hard so I can be here. She taught me to stand up for people who need it." "What did your dad teach you?" "How to be cruel to look cool." The tension was electric. I was prepared to physically intervene if Blake took a swing, which seemed increasingly likely. But then Michael spoke up from his seat. "Enough," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "I don't need anyone fighting because of me." Blake snorted. "See? Even the cripple knows his place." And that's when Ethan did something that changed everything. Instead of escalating or backing down, he pulled out his phone, an ancient model with a cracked screen, and held it up. "I've been recording since I got up," he said. "Every word. I'll be taking this to the principal, and if nothing happens, I'll post it online. Let's see what college recruiters think about it. Let's see what everyone's parents think when they see how the great Blake Thompson treats people." Blake's face went from red to white in seconds. "You wouldn't dare." "Try me," Ethan said quietly. "I've got nothing to lose." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Blake set the milk carton down, backed away, and stormed out of the cafeteria with his friends trailing behind him. The silence held for another beat before the cafeteria erupted in whispers. I reached the table just as Ethan sat down next to Michael. "You okay?" I heard him ask. Michael nodded, looking at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why did you do that? They'll come after you now." Ethan shrugged. "Maybe, but there's 2 of us now." That simple exchange hit me in the chest. 2 outsiders, finding solidarity in their shared experience of being marginalized for different reasons. One for his economic status, the other for his disability. But in that moment they had something the popular kids with all their social power didn't have, the moral courage to stand up for what was right. But what happened next was even more remarkable than that initial confrontation. Principal Davis called Ethan to his office that afternoon. I went with him, concerned about potential retaliation from the administration. Blake's father was not someone the school wanted to upset, and I worried Ethan would be punished for causing a disruption. We sat in the wood-paneled office with its fake plants and framed diplomas. Principal Davis, a man who had mastered the art of talking without saying anything, leaned back in his leather chair. "So, Mr. Carter, I understand there was an incident in the cafeteria today." Ethan nodded. "Yes, sir." "And you recorded this incident?" "Yes, sir." "I'd like to see this recording." Ethan handed over his phone without hesitation. We all watched as the video played, capturing the entire exchange in damning clarity. When it finished, I expected excuses, minimization, perhaps even anger at Ethan for documenting it. What I didn't expect was silence. Principal Davis set the phone down carefully and removed his glasses. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely troubled. "How long has this been going on?" he asked quietly. "With Michael? All year," Ethan replied. "With other kids? Since I got here." "And you've been here how long?" 3 months, sir. We moved from Delaware after Mom found work here." Principal Davis looked at me. "Is this accurate, Ms. Reynolds?" I nodded. "I've reported similar incidents involving Michael and other students. Blake Thompson has been warned multiple times. He sighed heavily. Written reports? Yes, at least 4 this semester alone. The principal was quiet for a long moment, rubbing his temples. I need to make some calls. Ethan, you did the right thing today, though I cannot officially encourage students to record each other. Ms. Reynolds, please stay a moment. Ethan, you're free to go to your next class. After Ethan left, Principal Davis looked at me directly. Those reports never reached my desk. That's impossible, I said. I filed them with Vice Principal Harmon myself. Blake's father and Vice Principal Harmon play golf together every Sunday, he said quietly. This stops now. I left his office with mixed emotions. Hope that something might finally change, but skepticism born from years of seeing similar promises fizzle out when faced with the realities of politics, budgets, and the path of least resistance. But this time was different. I felt it in my bones, though I couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was the steel in Principal Davis's voice. Maybe it was the evidence Ethan had captured. Or maybe it was simply that the right people had finally reached their breaking point at the same time. The next morning, I arrived at school early, as was my habit. The parking lot was nearly empty, but I noticed Ethan sitting on the front steps, hunched against the October chill. As I approached, I saw the bruise on his cheek. What happened? I asked, though I already knew. Ran into Blake and his friends after work last night. He said simply, It's fine. It's not fine, I replied, anger flaring. We need to report this. Ethan shook his head. No evidence this time. And anyway, I expected it. Then why did you stand up to him yesterday if you knew this would happen? He looked at me with an expression far too old for his 15 years. Because Michael didn't expect what was happening to him. He didn't choose it. He can't stop having cerebral palsy. But I chose this, and I can take it. I stood there, speechless at the wisdom and moral clarity of this boy who had every reason to be bitter, to look out only for himself in a world that had given him so few advantages. Come on, I said finally. Let's get some ice for that cheek. As we walked into the building, we found Michael waiting just inside the doors. His eyes widened when he saw Ethan's face, but before he could say anything, Ethan smiled. You should see the other guy, he joked. Michael didn't laugh. This is because of me. No, Ethan said firmly. This is because of Blake. Big difference. Michael still looked troubled, but he nodded and fell into step beside us as we headed to the nurse's office. I noticed he had a paper bag in his hands, which he awkwardly handed to Ethan. My mom made lunch for you, he said. She was pretty upset when I told her what happened yesterday. Ethan took the bag with visible surprise. Thanks. Tell her thanks. It was such a small thing, a homemade lunch. But I watched Ethan's face as he peeked inside the bag, and I realized it had been a long time since someone other than his mother had thought about his needs. For kids like Ethan, these small acts of care were rare and precious. The nurse clucked over Ethan's bruised face but asked no questions. We all knew the unwritten rules. Snitching only made things worse. She gave him an ice pack and a pass for his first period class, which he would now be late for. As Ethan and Michael headed out of the nurse's office, I heard Michael say, You don't have to keep hanging out with me, you know. They'll leave you alone if you don't. Ethan's response was immediate and certain. I'm not hanging out with you because I have to. I watched them disappear down the hallway, an unlikely friendship forged in adversity. Then I headed to Principal Davis's office, determined to ensure that Ethan's courage wouldn't be in vain. What followed was the most dramatic week in Westridge High's recent history. Vice Principal Harmon was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Blake Thompson and his friends received 2-week suspensions, unprecedented for star athletes mid-season. Blake's father stormed the school, threatening lawsuits and funding cuts. But something had fundamentally changed. The video had made it impossible to look away, to pretend, to minimize. It had forced everyone to confront the reality that had been hiding in plain sight. Principal Davis called an all-school assembly, where he did something I'd never seen an administrator do. He apologized. We have failed to create a safe environment for all students, he said to the silent auditorium. That changes today. The new anti-bullying initiative was comprehensive. Anonymous reporting systems, mandatory sensitivity training for staff and students, a peer mediation program, regular check-ins with students who had been targeted. Most importantly, a zero-tolerance policy for bullying with clear, consistent consequences, regardless of a student's status or family connections. But policies are just words on paper unless people embrace them. And that's where the real miracle happened. Ethan and Michael became the unlikely catalysts for a cultural shift. Their friendship, forged in that moment of conflict, grew into something that transcended the usual high school boundaries. Michael, who had spent so long trying to be invisible, found his voice. Ethan, who had been dismissed as trailer trash, revealed himself to be a natural leader with a gift for bringing people together. They started a lunch group for students who didn't fit in elsewhere. At first it was just the two of them. Then a few others joined. The girl with severe anxiety, the boy who had recently immigrated from Somalia, the overweight freshman who had been eating alone in a bathroom stall. By winter break, their table needed to be extended to accommodate everyone who wanted to sit there. The backlash wasn't immediate, but it came. Blake returned from his suspension with a chip on his shoulder and a desire for revenge. His social status had taken a hit. The invincibility that had protected him was cracking. Some of his friends, sensing a shift in the wind, distanced themselves. Others doubled down on their loyalty, eager to prove they weren't soft. For 2 weeks, it was subtle. Shoulders checking Ethan in the hallway. Michael's locker vandalized with slurs. Anonymous threats slipped under their classroom doors. I watched Ethan carefully during this time, worried that his resolve would crumble under the sustained pressure. But if anything, he seemed more determined. He walked with his head up, making eye contact with Blake and his remaining cronies rather than avoiding them. He sat with Michael in the cafeteria without hesitation. He participated in class, no longer trying to fade into the background. The showdown came, as these things often do, when adults weren't watching. It was during PE, in the locker room where teacher supervision was minimal. I pieced together what happened later, from multiple accounts. Blake and 3 friends cornered Ethan as he was changing after class. They knocked his books to the floor, shoved him against the lockers, the usual prelude to a beating. "You think you changed anything?" Blake taunted. "You're still nothing. Your cripple friend is still nothing." Ethan didn't fight back physically. Instead, he looked Blake in the eye and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I know you're scared." That stopped Blake mid-shove. "What did you say to me?" "I said, I know you're scared," Ethan repeated calmly. "Your dad's on your case about football. Coach is talking about starting Davis over you since you missed those games. Your girlfriend's thinking about breaking up with you. And now people are finally seeing who you really are. So yeah, you're terrified. And I get it. It's easier to hit me than deal with all that." The locker room had gone silent. Blake's face contorted with rage. But before he could throw a punch, another voice spoke up. "Leave him alone." It wasn't Michael this time. It was Jamal Washington, Blake's teammate and friend since elementary school. A boy who had stood by and watched countless times as Blake tormented others. Blake turned, disbelief written across his face. "You taking his side now?" Jamal looked uncomfortable but stood his ground. "This isn't right, man. It never was. I'm just finally saying it." 2 more boys stepped forward, then another. Not Ethan's friends. He barely knew them. They were from different social circles, different lunch tables. But something had shifted. The unwritten rule that protected bullies, the collective agreement to look away, was breaking down. Blake looked around, sensing the change. For the first time, he was outnumbered, not physically but morally. Without another word, he grabbed his backpack and stormed out, his remaining loyal friends trailing behind. The story spread through the school like wildfire, growing with each retelling. By the end of the day, half the football team had allegedly stood up to Blake. It wasn't true, of course, but the perception was creating its own reality. Students who had been afraid to cross Blake now felt emboldened. Those who had silently disapproved of his behavior found their voices. I watched this unfold with a mixture of amazement and caution. School cultures don't change overnight. There would be setbacks, resistance, the inevitable human tendency to revert to old patterns. But something fundamental had shifted, and it had started with one boy who refused to accept the status quo. As the weeks passed, the changes solidified. Blake, faced with increasing isolation, had a choice to make: adapt or become irrelevant. To everyone's surprise, including mine, he chose a third option. He approached Ethan one day before first period. I was on hall duty and watched the interaction carefully, ready to intervene. "Can we talk?" Blake asked, his voice low. Ethan regarded him warily but nodded. They stepped to the side of the hallway. not far from where I stood. "I want to apologize," Blake said, the words sounding strange in his mouth as if he was speaking a foreign language. "To you and to Michael. What I did, it was wrong." Ethan's face remained neutral. "Why are you telling me this?" Blake shifted uncomfortably. "My dad, he's making me see a therapist after everything that happened. At first I thought it was BS, but some of what she says makes sense about why I act the way I do. It's not an excuse, but I'm trying to be better." I couldn't hear Ethan's response, but I saw his posture relax slightly. They spoke for another minute before Blake extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan shook it. It wasn't a Hollywood transformation. Blake didn't suddenly become best friends with Ethan and Michael. Real life rarely works that way. But he stopped being the villain in their story, which was its own kind of progress. By spring, the changes at Westridge had caught the attention of the local news. A reporter came to do a story on the school's successful anti-bullying initiative. When asked who deserved credit, Principal Davis pointed to Ethan and Michael. "Sometimes it takes the courage of one student to hold up a mirror to all of us," he said. "Ethan showed us who we were allowing ourselves to become through our inaction. Michael showed us the dignity of someone who refuses to be defined by how others treat him. Together, they've shown us who we can be as a community." The reporter interviewed them in the art room where Michael was finishing his latest project. Ethan, still uncomfortable with attention, kept deflecting praise. "I just did what anyone would do," he insisted. "But that's the point," the reporter pressed. "Not everyone did do it. Just you." Michael spoke up then, his speech more confident than it had been at the beginning of the year. "Ethan saw me when I was invisible," he said. "That changed everything." The story aired on the evening news, then got picked up by national outlets. Suddenly, Westridge High wasn't just another suburban school. It was a model for creating positive change. Educators from other districts called to learn about their approach. Students started social media accounts dedicated to sharing stories of inclusion and standing up against bullying. For Ethan, the attention was overwhelming at times. His mother cried when she saw him on TV, proudly telling her employers that was her son. But some things didn't change. He still wore the same patched jeans, still worked evenings at the gas station, still lived in the apartment on the edge of town. What changed was how he carried himself. The boy who had tried to blend into the background now walked the halls with quiet confidence. Not arrogance, not pride, but the steady assurance of someone who knows exactly who they are and what they stand for. The end of the school year brought another surprise. Principal Davis announced the creation of a new annual award, the Carter Winters Courage Award, to be given to students who demonstrated exceptional moral courage and compassion. Ethan and Michael were the first recipients, receiving a standing ovation from the same student body that had once ignored or tormented them. As the students filed out after the ceremony, I overheard a conversation between two freshman girls. "I can't believe that used to happen here," one said. "Someone being bullied for having a disability? That's so messed up." "I know, right? Who does that?" her friend agreed. "Just 9 months. That's all it had taken to transform what was acceptable, to shift the baseline of normal behavior. What once went unchallenged was now unthinkable to a new generation of students." Summer came, bringing change for everyone. Principal Davis received a promotion to district superintendent where he could implement similar initiatives across all schools. Vice Principal Harmon resigned rather than face further investigation. Blake's father, perhaps seeing which way the wind was blowing, became an unexpected ally, donating funds for sensitivity training programs and accessibility improvements. Ethan's mother found a better-paying job thanks to the positive attention her son had received. They moved to a slightly better apartment, though Ethan still worked at the gas station, saving money for college. Michael's parents became advocates for disability rights in education, starting a nonprofit to help other families navigate the system. I stayed at Westridge, watching the ripple effects continue to spread. The following year brought new students, new challenges, but the culture had fundamentally shifted. The peer mediation program expanded. The anonymous reporting system worked efficiently. Teachers intervened earlier and more effectively. Most importantly, students themselves maintained the new normal, stepping in when they saw something wrong. One day, as I was grading papers after school, I looked up to see Ethan in my classroom doorway. He was helping Michael with an art project for the upcoming fall festival, and they had stayed late. "Ms. Reynolds, can I ask you something?" Ethan said. Of course. Do you think it really made a difference? Everything that happened? I gestured for them both to sit down. Why do you ask? Ethan shrugged. Sometimes I wonder if it would have happened anyway. If someone else would have stood up if I hadn't. Or if the school would have changed the rules eventually. Maybe, I admitted. But that's not the point. You didn't wait for someone else. You didn't wait for eventually. You saw something wrong and you did something about it right then, right there. Michael nodded. Before Ethan stood up for me, I was thinking about asking my parents to homeschool me. I couldn't take it anymore. Now I actually like coming to school. You want to know if it made a difference? I asked, pointing out the window to where students were crossing the courtyard. Look out there. See that freshman with the crutches? Last year he would have been a target. Now he's just another student, that's the difference. You two changed what's possible here. They both looked out the window, taking in the ordinary scene of students laughing, talking, existing together without the undercurrent of fear that had once defined so much of school life for kids like them. It wasn't just us, Ethan said finally. You believed us. Principal Davis listened. Everyone who stood up after we did, they're part of it too. That's how change works, I told them. It starts with one person, but it doesn't end there. You gave others permission to be their best selves. That's a rare gift. As they left my classroom, I watched them walk down the hall, the poor kid and the disabled kid who had rewritten the rules of an entire school through a single act of courage. They weren't outcasts anymore. They weren't defined by what they lacked or what made them different. They were leaders, role models, the standard by which others measured their own character. The story of Westridge High continued to evolve, as all stories do. By the following year, many of the students who had witnessed the transformation had graduated, taking the lessons with them to colleges, jobs, and communities across the country. New students arrived, knowing only the changed culture, taking it for granted that certain behaviors were unacceptable, that differences were respected, that courage was celebrated. Ethan graduated with honors and a scholarship to the state university, the first in his family to attend college. Michael's artwork won a national competition, earning him recognition and opportunities he once couldn't have imagined. Blake, to everyone's surprise, went on to major in psychology, with plans to work with troubled teens. And me? I'm still teaching at Westridge. Every year I tell new teachers the story of Ethan and Michael, not as a cautionary tale, but as a reminder of what's possible when one person refuses to accept that this is just how things are. I often think about that moment in the cafeteria, how easily it could have gone differently if Ethan had stayed silent like everyone else, if Michael had accepted his role as a victim, if I had failed to support them, if Principal Davis had chosen institutional peace over justice, if Blake had never confronted his own behavior. So many potential turning points, so many opportunities for the story to follow the usual script. But instead, we got a new ending, or rather a new beginning. The next fall, I noticed something remarkable on the first day of school. A new student with visible burn scars on her face entered the cafeteria during lunch, her eyes down, clearly bracing for the stares and whispers that had probably followed her everywhere. Without any prompting, without any special announcement, 3 different groups of students waved her over to their tables. It happened so naturally that someone who didn't know the school's history might have thought nothing of it. But I knew. This was Ethan and Michael's legacy. Not the awards or the news stories, but this simple act of inclusion repeated daily in ways big and small. 2 years after that famous day in the cafeteria, I received an email from Michael. He was thriving in his senior year, preparing college applications, and his latest art series was being displayed in a local gallery. But that wasn't why he was writing. I wanted you to know, he wrote, that I heard from a student at Lakeside High. They're starting their own anti-bullying program based on what we did at Westridge. Ethan and I are going to speak at their first assembly next month. It's spreading, Ms. Reynolds. What happened here is spreading. I sat at my computer, tears in my eyes, thinking about the exponential nature of change. How one boy's courage had transformed a school. How that school was now transforming others. How those others would go on to influence more schools, more communities, more lives. This is how real change happens. Not through grand gestures or sweeping policies, though those have their place, but through individual acts of courage that inspire others to find their own bravery. Through the accumulation of small choices that gradually shift what a community considers normal and acceptable. Through the quiet, persistent refusal to accept that cruelty is inevitable or that injustice is unchangeable. The skinny boy who defended a classmate with a disability hadn't just changed the rules of the school, he had changed its heart, and in doing so, he reminded all of us of a simple truth we too often forget. Courage is contagious. When one person stands up, others find their own strength to do the same. That day in the cafeteria, when Ethan Carter faced down Blake Thompson, it wasn't just about defending Michael Winters. It was about defending the idea that we are all responsible for the community we create, that silence in the face of cruelty makes us complicit, that even the most powerless among us has the power to say, "This is wrong, and I won't pretend otherwise." I still teach at Westridge High. Ethan graduated, the first in his family to go to college, earning a scholarship based partly on his community leadership. Michael is studying art at a prestigious school on the East Coast. They stay in touch, their friendship transcending the usual high school boundaries of time and distance. Blake Thompson went to a state college instead of the Ivy League school his father had planned for him. I heard he joined a mentoring program for at-risk youth, though I'm not sure if that's true or just a hopeful rumor. I like to think it's true, that his journey continued beyond what I witnessed. Principal Davis, now Superintendent Davis, implemented similar initiatives district-wide. The Carter Winters Courage Award has become the most prestigious honor a student can receive, recognizing those who embody the spirit of that October day when a skinny kid stood up and a school began to change. Sometimes when I walk the halls of Westridge now, I try to imagine describing it to someone who only knew the school before. How do you explain a culture shift? How do you measure the absence of cruelty? How do you quantify kindness that has become so normal it's unremarkable? Perhaps the best measure is this. When new teachers join our staff, they're often confused by the emphasis we place on our anti-bullying policies. Is bullying really such a big problem here? They ask. And those of us who remember can only shake our heads and say, not anymore, not for a long time. That's the legacy of Ethan Carter, a boy with worn-out shoes and unwavering principles. That's the impact of Michael Winters, who turned his pain into purpose. That's the power of one moment of courage that sparked 1,000 more. I was there when it happened. When a skinny poor kid with nothing to lose faced down the school's biggest bullies to defend someone who couldn't defend himself. What happened next silenced an entire school and changed the rules forever. But the real miracle wasn't just that moment. It was what came after. The slow, steady work of building something better. The daily choices to be kinder, braver, more inclusive. The ripple effects that continue to spread, touching lives in ways we may never fully know. So the next time you see injustice and wonder if speaking up matters, remember this story. Remember that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "This is wrong. I will not be silent." And that voice, however small, has the power to change everything. If this story moved you, take a moment to think about your own school or workplace. Where could you stand up? Who might need an ally? What small act of courage might set something bigger in motion? Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who might be feeling powerless or alone. Someone who needs to be reminded that they have more influence than they realize. And remember, it's not the size of the person in the fight that matters. It's the size of the fight in the person. Ethan Carter proved that. And in doing so, he changed a school, inspired a community, and left a legacy that continues to touch lives every single day. One moment of courage, that's all it takes to start. What will yours be?